Hello and welcome to a new session on the topic ArchiMate for Architecture Modeling in alignment with the TOGAF Architecture Development Method ADM. So far we have covered the motivation layer, the strategy domain, the application, the business architecture domain, the application and system or technology domain. In today's discussion, we will move to the topic migration and implementation. If you have downloaded the PDF for ArchiMate Pocket Reference from the ArchiMate library on the Open Group website, then you will find that we are talking about implementation and migration domain in Chapter 11. Let's get started with creating a new ArchiMate view. And our starting point will be the motivation layer. So this motivation layer we have created in a previous session for a hypothetical case study of an online store. And we have set these stakeholder concerns or drivers and map them to goals and outcomes. Moreover, we have outlined the requirements and the principles, the metrics, etc. that will be used to measure the success and implement. And here I will emphasize on the word implement this motivation or strategy. So our starting point will be how we move from one stage to the other, how we organize and structure the implementation working packages that will make it possible to achieve this target architecture. I'll start over in the new ArchiMate view that I've just created, and I called it migration and implementation layer. I'll revisit the motivation layer to set out the requirements once again. And the first requirement that we have still at the top of our head is to implement QR code return label. So the reason why I'm starting with a new requirement set of annotations is that after all of these sessions, the requirements have been refined and revisited multiple times. And this now is the refined set of requirements that will be implemented at the end of the day after a set of rounds of discussions with the stakeholders. So it doesn't hurt to write them again or to write them fresh. On the other hand, I want to show specifically the work packages that will make it possible to implement these requirements. So I will be a little bit of improvising a few more requirements that perhaps have not been discussed so far. So the first requirement I have written down is to implement a QR code for the return label. And the second requirement is to implement a pre-check feature on the delivery partner handheld device. So when the delivery partner is coming to pick up a return item, then he will scan the return item visually, and then an AI system will kick in to visually check this returned item, make sure that it is not defected or in this original state as it was delivered. So this is one of the requirements, and you can see here that also involves a lot of interactions on the handheld device and you need to integrate with different platforms, whether it is Android, iOS, or any other platform or proprietary platform. On the other hand, you need to have a back end with integration with an AI system that will perform this visual check with image processing or a deep learning network or an LLM even. And the other requirement that we have is to add the recommender system. And this is one of the features that we have discussed multiple times in our business and application architecture. Even with the infrastructure or system architecture, we have also touched on the topic. So we haven't covered this panel before. Appearance. Over here you can change the font, the colors, etc., and the alignment of your cells. So you can make it the text position in the middle or you make it at the bottom. However you feel more visually appearing in that case. You can change the color of the fonts. You have a few options you can play around with. So far so good. So we have three requirements in the motivation layer. You can tell from the color of the items that we have added. But this is not the topic of our today's session. The topic of our today's session here is these pink colored items at the very bottom of the palette. And you can see that we have got so far, we have discussed all of the annotations that are above, the connectors, we have discussed grouping, we have discussed location, and then strategy, business architecture, application architecture, system architecture, physical architecture, motivation layer, and now we are in the migration and the implementation layer. So we introduce quickly the items that are available. There aren't many of them, so let's take a quick look which item does what. So this is the work package. This is the implementation layer. So the first work package that we can imagine here to implement the QR code return label. So this is a work package assigned to one of our back-end teams and front-end teams to create a QR code functionality. We can even name it work package WP QR code. We can give it a numbering, however we feel is the most appropriate standard in our organization or enterprise. The second item is the deliverable itself. What does the deliverable look like? So when we implemented the QR code, what are deliverables do we have? We have a new deliverable for the website. So we have online store feature, which will be release, online store release. Assuming we started with version 1, so that will be released 1.1. And make it semantic correct versioning, so 1.1.0. So this will be our first deliverable from the QR code feature. And if this feature will be rolled out on the mobile platform, then we also have an Android app release 1.10, etc. The second item here is an implementation event. So the implementation event here says that approval of this work package. So work package approved. So it means that the management have given a sign off on this work package, and then we have also the financial means and the human resources, etc., to implement this work package. There could be other implementation events, like we are bending on some hardware or some adjustments and upgrades in our data centers. So these are all implementation events that we are bending on, or implementation events that will be resulting also from the implementation. So for example, the release has been deployed, the release has been tested, AP test, etc. Finally, we have here a plateau. And a plateau, this is a state where we have achieved the target architecture or a transient architecture, means that a middle state that is also stable and quite of a milestone to think of. And this means here it is a plateau. So we could say here plateau first milestone, we say Q1 with QR code, for example. And the final item here is the gap. What gap does exist between a plateau and the next one? So the plateau between the current state and the QR code state is that we have a gap item, and that means we have, for example, a manual print label. So this is the gap between the current state and the state we will arrive at. So it will visually make sense if we have another plateau as is architecture, and then the gap between both of them is the print label. So let's put it now together in context of the motivation requirements that we have listed above. So we have the work package that will realize this first feature to implement a QR code return label. Realizes. By now you should be familiar with all of the connectors. We have covered all of them in the previous sessions so far. And if in doubt, always consult the reference or use a magic connector. Second work package here that will be for the pre-check feature on the hand delivery is that we have our platform engineers or our embedded systems, assuming it is an embedded system work package, and say pre-check feature on the mobile devices, on the handheld devices. And there will be another work package for our backend systems to add the AI functionality, so data science or backend or AI engineering. So these two work packages, they will realize the feature to implement the visual pre-check. And finally, adding the recommender system turned out to be quite of the most of the work that were done in this architecture work package. So I believe there will be also more than at least one work package. So for the back end, it will build the microservices and the work package for our infrastructure to add the Kubernetes services and bots and RBACs, etc., as we have laid out in the previous session, as we have discussed the technology domain. So for a quick reminder, let's revisit. So we have seen here, there will be quite of a work here to add this functionality with firewalls, plugins, etc., etc. And these two work packages, they will realize the last feature. Of course, there could be more than work packages. They will be assigned to more stakeholders or partners, implementation partners, one or more teams in this organization or sub-organizations or partner organizations. There could be architecture working packages. We have set a gap and realize that we need to dive deeper into one of the topics. So to reduce our footprint in the cloud or to investigate further on one of the features related to the pre-checks, for example, in the on the spot where the employees of the delivery partner need quite of a training to do their task. Perhaps we found out through stakeholder management that one of the solutions is quite of a transit solution or intermediary solution, and that we need to work out towards a final solution that is more of acceptable for the next quarter. So this also one of the possibilities of the work package that can result from this analysis. So far we have covered the work packages and the deliverables. From each work package we can map them out. So for the QR code we have said the deliverable would be the release 110 from the online store. We could have that still here at the bottom. The deliverable from the embedded system is the embedded system pre-check. So we will have a new our proprietary operating system and firmware firmware release step 1.1.1. And of course the AI engineering pre-check that will be also in the backend side. Perhaps the backend will have some versioning and the APIs will be updated. So it makes perfect sense to say there will be also backend update for the APIs. So this will be one of the deliverables and SDK, and there you can map also dependency between both of them. So the deliverable APIs new release v2, or we could say 1.1 if assuming the versions are aligned together. How do we map the dependency? It's not explicitly here stated that there is a dependency between both of them. You can say association. An aggregation or composition also, as long as you interpret it, but you say this. An association is a global universal connector that can be applied almost everywhere. And then we have, for the recommender system, we have backend releases and infrastructure. I will say it microservices, new microservices. That's the recommender system service or recommender service directly. That will be introduced version 0. V 0 or 1. So the choice in this case is not arbitrary. You don't just pick the numbering as you find it suitable to write, but there must be a standard in the organization that says, here is our semantic versioning standards and guidelines. Usually it is documented in the architecture repository or or Confluence pages, or however that your architecture repository is maintained in your enterprise or organization. So we have a few milestones here or plateaus that we will achieve, starting from our as-is architecture. Then we'll have a milestone that states we have a QR code. We have another milestone that says we will have, assuming they're all happening in parallel, we'll have Q1 also, the pre-check. To keep it generic, you could also drop the Q1 or Q2 naming so that as at this phase of the architecture, you are not quite sure what are the delivery timelines. There will be still a lot of discussions with the project management so that you can assign the resources to get this implemented. Could be in Q2. So to keep the architecture work that you have produced quite valid and independent of any timelines or dependency from the project management, then you can also drop the Q1 here in the naming or any similar annotation that you would use in your use case. On the other hand, if you have already aligned with the project management and the implementation partners, then this could also be used since you are quite aligned on this with other stakeholders. And finally, recommended or personalized browser. And this all starts with the event the work package has been approved and ends with the event work package or packages delivered. And of course, here we have the gap between these both architectures. Let's connect the dots. So the relationship between the gap and the as-is architecture is an association where they have many much options. And this gap is implemented or filled through this online store release. Let's see. So you could say here accesses or realized by. Let's stick with realization. So this QR code plateau is realized through the deliverable from this work package. This makes more sense. Similarly, we will add these ones over here, having our realization relationship. And this one over here, realization relationship. And here it will be tricky because these are independent features that are implemented in parallel. So we cannot really say that the gap between the pre-check and the QR code is something, but the pre-check and the as-is architecture. And let's first map the events so that we make some space for ourselves. So the event related to the work package, packages, we have quite a few of them. So this is the triggering relationship, and this applies to all of the work packages in this collection. So a grouping here would be more sensible. Work packages. Composition relationship. And finally, the relationship to the final state is a trigger, and there could be events in between, such as testing, quality assurance, delivery, user acceptance test. However, the process in your enterprises or in your organization. So we are pretty much through. So we have as-is architecture, and the as-is architecture defines the gaps between all of our intermediary relation states. It makes sense here to have this relationship at the middle. So you can see in the gap, why is this quite important and needs to be emphasized in our architecture work package? Because the gap defines the transient architecture, the transient states. What will you do until the target architecture is being implemented? So there could be also implication that you need some synchronization or data migration work at the end of the work package so that you synchronize the manual state to the QR code state in this example. Other examples also rise in the practice quite often when you have these transit states, because agility and time to market, they matter a lot to the stakeholders. So you need to provide solutions as an architect. Assign this architecture working package. It's not only your job to define the target architecture, but also collaborate with the stakeholders to define the transit states and the situation that happen in between until you arrive at the target architecture. And here we have another gap. So with the pre-check, what happens then is that we have, until we implement the automated pre-check, we have a manual pre-check or pre-check at the collection hub, as we have shown in the business architecture of the return process in a previous session. If you still recall this discussion, here on the screen we had a central hub, we had a warehouse, and in between there could be also an opportunity to add this manual visual check, or even a centralized quick made solution that will do the scanning at scale in these central points until it is propagated to the end devices, handheld devices. Centralized central hub check with quick and with a quick solution. Of course, we have again our associations. So this is an association relationship. So this is a connector, a valid connector. This is here a connection. So you can use it with the universal items. It will be interpreted differently when you generate the documentation. That's why you might say it is redundant, but it is not, because the documentation is also generated based on these types, on semantics of these connections. So in that case, the documentation will reflect this different type of connector. So the last gap we have here with the recommender, what happens is that no recommender systems available, or no personalization, or we just have a middle solution that we say, okay, we will get the recommendations based on the category based. So if you made purchases in the category of electronics, then we will assume that you are someone who is interested in electronics, and we will get you more recommendations from this category, regardless whether we have an AI intelligent smart system behind or not. And it could be the case that after rolling out the AI-based system, that the stakeholders say, oh, we did much better with this transit solution, and that delivered them more sales than we have expected. And perhaps it could even surpass the AI intelligent system, we don't know. But this is also a possibility to account for as an architect in your work, that the transit states could be transit for quite a while. So that's pretty much it. We add our legend so that we have an interpretation, what's its simple meaning. You can add some groupings to make it visually appearing, etc. Export the image. Yeah. Give it a name and choose the format, etc. So in this session, we have covered the implementation and migration, or migration and the implementation domain, corresponding to chapter 11 in ArchiMate specifications. So far, we have covered almost all of the domains in the ArchiMate standards. We have aligned it as much as possible to the ADM method of the TOGAF. I hope you found this video useful, and see you in future videos. Thank you very much.